They tied her to a cactus and left her at sundown. A prospector found her at dawn with his water skin. The skin was almost dry. I'd been rationing since Seco Creek, which had gone bone white and cracked 2 days before I got there, and the water skin I'd filled up at Caldera Spring, 3 hard miles off the road and half that back up a shale slope. That skin had maybe 4 swallows left by the time the sky started going orange behind me. I was moving east in the dark not because I wanted to, but because the mule did. Cisco had a feel for water that I'd stopped arguing with about 6 years back. He'd go off course by half a mile, you'd think you were lost, and then there'd be a seep in the rock or a cattle tank you'd never have smelled from the trail. The mule was smarter than most men I'd partnered with, which is a low bar admittedly, but still. I don't know what time it was when he stopped. 2, maybe 3 in the morning. The stars were so thick they had weight. I could see the dark shapes of the cholla and the flat pads of the prickly pear along the arroyo bank, and I could see the tall shadow of the saguaro maybe 40 feet ahead, and I could see what was tied to it. I sat on that mule for a long moment. My first thought, and I'm not proud of this, was that it was an ambush. You've been on the frontier long enough, your first thought at a strange shape in the dark is always ambush. I'd lost 2 partners that way. Not to ambush exactly, but to not thinking clearly, to going towards something that looked like a person when the light was bad and ending up staring down a gun. So I sat. I pulled the rifle across my lap. I watched. Nothing else moved. No horses. No fire glow anywhere in the dark. No sound except the mule breathing and the wind pushing through the cholla, and faint something else. Something I had to be still to hear. A sound like a person makes when they've been past crying and they're down to just air. Just the raw body of it. No sound you'd make if you were setting a trap. I rode up slow, kept the rifle, got within 10 feet and stopped. She was lashed to the base of the saguaro with what looked like harness leather, her arms pulled back around the trunk, tied at the wrists behind it, her legs folded under her and her head dropped forward. Her clothes were a woman's clothes but caked in trail dust, the blouse gray with it. Her hair was loose and matted against her face. The way her head hung, I thought for a moment she might already be gone, but then she made that sound again, that hollowed-out sound, and I stepped down off Cisco and went to her. "I'm going to give you water," I said, not announcing myself, not explaining. I'd learned a long time ago that when a person is as far down as that, words with too many edges to them just land wrong. I said it like I was saying a simple fact, and I took the water skin off my shoulder, and I went around to face her. She lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen, left one nearly shut. Someone had hit her more than once from the look of it, and her lip was split and had dried black in the crease. She looked at me and I could see her trying to figure out what I was, what I meant, whether I was another version of the same kind of harm she'd already had. That calculation happened behind her eyes in maybe 2 seconds. Then something in her face went quiet, not relaxed exactly, but decided. "Please," she said. One word, she'd used all she had for it. I tilted the water skin and let her drink slow, and she did, slow, sensible, like a woman who'd been rationing her own self all her life, and knew the trick of not taking more than she could keep down. I watched her throat move. I looked away after a second because it felt wrong to watch too close, like seeing something private you hadn't been invited to. "I'm going to cut the leather," I said. "Might hurt when the blood comes back." "All right." I got behind her and took out the knife. The leather was 1/4-inch harness strap, doubled. They'd been thorough. I worked the blade slow. It took a while. When the last piece gave and her arms came free, she made a sound and slumped forward, and I caught her, her shoulders against my chest, and held her there while her hands and arms found themselves again. She didn't cry. I want to say that not because crying would have been wrong, but because it says something about her. She made a sound, but it was the sound of pain, just pain, a plain, honest sound, and when it passed she pushed herself upright and said, "Can you help me stand?" Not a question, really, just telling me what was needed. I helped her stand. She weighed less than she should have. When she got her feet under her, she stood straight, which cost her something. I could see it. And she turned to look at the rope and the cactus and the thing that had been done to her. And she looked at it for a few seconds the way you look at something you want to fix in your memory to be sure you never go light on it, never forget what it actually was. Then she turned to me and said, "How much water do you have left?" "Enough," I said, which was not strictly accurate. She looked at me. "How much?" "Cisco knows water. We'll find some before morning." She looked at the mule. She looked back at me. She said, "What's your name?" "Elias Cord." She said, "I'm Nora Vass." She said it straight, not apologizing for herself, not sizing me up for whether she had to, just a name offered even. "Who did this?" I said. "4 men, they work for a man named Breckhauser who wants the parcel I hold deed to." She touched the front of her blouse, and under it I could hear the faint crinkle of paper. "I had documents on me. He wanted those and he wanted me gone. His men took the documents and left me here. They believed," she said, "that someone would find me eventually, but that I might be dead by then, or at least that I'd walk away and not come back." She said all of this in a flat, even voice, like she was giving me a report. "Will you walk away?" I said. She looked at me, and then she looked out east where the sky was starting to go indigo at the very edge, the first thin trace of what was coming. "No," she said. Cisco found water an hour before full light. A stock tank behind a rise, barely a mile east, half choked with algae but standing water, and that was enough. Nora drank and I filled the skin, and we sat down in the gravel with the mule between us and the wind and waited for the light. I made a small fire. I had jerked venison and a handful of dried apricots, the last of them, and I set them between us without comment, and she ate without ceremony, which I appreciated. There's a kind of person who apologizes for their appetite, who thanks you 3 times for a thing, who makes a whole performance of being grateful in a way that ends up being more about their discomfort than about the thing. Nora Vass ate the meat and the apricots and said once thank you, and that was the end of it. I was 57 years old that summer. I'd been alone since Ruth Ann died, which was 9 years back, and before that I'd been alone for different reasons, and before that there was a war, and before the war there were my father's fields in Tennessee which I'd left at 17 and never gone back to. What I'm saying is that I was a man who'd been by himself so long that the presence of another person in the dark, even a hurt one, even a stranger, had a weight to it I'd almost forgotten about. Not uncomfortable, just present. The way a room changes when someone else is in it. She sat with her knees pulled up and she watched the fire, and after a while she said, "You were heading somewhere." "Morale's Flats. I've got a claim up there, worked at Summers." "Any good?" "Good enough, not rich." She nodded. She said, "I have 37 acres southeast of Patience Springs. Good grass, a creek that runs 11 months, limestone ridge on the north side that cuts the wind. It belonged to my husband, who died 2 years ago of a fever." She said it plain. "I've been working it alone. Breckhauser has been trying to buy me out since the month after Frank died. I've told him no each time." She paused. "I had the water rights documents on me because I'd been to Tucson to have them filed proper. To make them harder to contest, his men got to me on the way back." She looked at the fire. "Those documents, are they something he can use without your signature?" "I don't know, I don't think so, but I don't know." "I know a man in Patience Springs," I said. "Lawyer named Holt Garber, he's honest." "He'd know." She looked at me then, just looked at me. Then she said, "How far is Patience Springs from your claim?" 11 miles. She nodded slowly. "I'd need to get there before Hauser's men get back to him and he does something with those papers, or files something false, or comes out to the property." She looked at her hands. Her wrists were raw from the leather. "I've got no horse. My horse is, I don't know where my horse is. They ran her off." "You can ride, Cisco." "That's your riding mule." "I'll walk." She looked at me sharply, not the look of offense, the look of a woman calibrating whether she was being told a thing that was true, whether the man saying it knew what he was saying. I was 57 and still in good legs, but it was getting on to full summer and we were in the desert. "I won't let you walk 11 miles in June heat," she said. "Then we'll take turns." She held my eyes for a moment, then she said, "All right," and went back to the fire. We set out at first light. I walked for the first 2 hours while she rode. The ground was hard-baked caliche and red rock and the heat came up early. I didn't mind walking. I'd been walking most of my life. There is a thing that happens when you walk in country like that early, when the air still has a touch of night in it, and the shadows are long and the saguaro stand up like old men who have seen everything. You stop having thoughts exactly, and you start having more of a hum, a kind of even interior weather. I hadn't lost that even after Ruth Ann. I'd lost a lot of things, but not that. She rode quiet. She wasn't a talker on the road, which suited me. Once she said, down from the mule, "There's a wash to the north that cuts about a mile off if you angle at that ironwood stand." I looked where she was pointing, and I could see the wash, and I angled for it. She was right. "You know this country," I said. "I've ridden it 2 years." Around mid-morning, she climbed down and said, "Your turn," and held Cisco's lead while I mounted. She walked good, not fast but steady, a woman who'd learned to meter herself. She picked her path without fussing. When we crossed a stretch of loose shale, she moved her feet the way you do when you know shale, the flat placement and the testing weight. She'd spent time in this country. Real time, the kind that gets into you. About noon, we stopped under a big Palo Verde for the heat. There was a little shade. We passed the water skin. She'd started looking at me differently somewhere in the last few miles, not softened exactly, because I don't think Nora Vass softened toward anyone without a reason, but with attention. Like she was taking me seriously in a way that had been slow to form, and was now formed. "Why were you out here?" she said. "In the dark, I mean, most men camp." "I was running low on water. Cisco doesn't camp when he wants water." "You trust the mule's judgment." "More than my own in the dark." She almost smiled, not quite. Frank was like that. He had a horse, old Blue Roan. Frank would read the horse's ears and know things before he saw them. I used to think it was foolish. She looked at Cisco. It wasn't. "How'd he die?" I said. Not a question I'd have usually asked. But something about the day had made the usual borders feel arbitrary. "Fever, like I said, it came on fast, 3 days and he was gone." She looked out at the heat shimmer on the flats. "I thought about selling. Right after, I won't lie. The place was his idea mostly, his dream more than mine. But it was ours by then. And then Hauser sent his man with an offer, and the offer was so low and the man was so sure I'd take it." She stopped. "I decided I wasn't going anywhere." "What do you need to keep it running? The property?" She looked at me like the question surprised her. Like most people had been asking her the opposite, how much she'd take when she'd give in, who she'd sell to. She thought for a moment. "I need the water rights filed. That's the first thing. After that, I need a hand for fall gather, my herd's manageable but not alone. And I need the north fence restrung before winter, the posts are soft." She paused. "Those are the practical things. What are the other things?" She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "I need people to know I'm not going anywhere. That counts for more than it should out here. People make their decisions about you based on whether they think you'll last." We got into Patience Springs in the late afternoon. The town was a main street and a side street and a livery and a church that doubled as a court when the circuit judge came through. Holt Garber's office was above the mercantile. We went up. He was a small man, dry, meticulous. He'd practiced in St. Louis before his lungs brought him west, and he kept the manners of a St. Louis lawyer even here, which I'd always thought was both foolish and useful depending on the situation. When we walked in, he looked at Nora Vass, at her face, her wrists, her clothes, and he didn't say anything about any of it. He just said, "Sit down, please," and he meant it. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is a lawyer's skill when they've got it, and when she finished, he said, "The water rights documents, even if Hauser has them, can't be re-registered without your signature or a legal proceeding. What he might do is file a competing claim and make it your burden to contest. That costs money and time." He looked at her steadily. "But you filed in Tucson, and the filing date precedes any action he could take today. That helps you significantly." "I can write to the county recorder tonight." Nora said, "How much?" He named a number. She didn't flinch. She said, "I'll have it to you in 10 days. He said, "That's fine." I said, "What does she need to do in the meantime?" "About Hauser." Garber looked at me. He'd known me 4 years, the way you know a man who comes through regular. "She needs someone at the property, is what she needs. Hauser won't do anything legal for now with the filing on record, but legal isn't always the only concern." We ate supper at the boarding house. The woman who ran it, Dollars Fitch, gave Nora a room and a basin and clean clothes from a trunk she kept for emergencies, and she didn't ask any questions, which was its own kind of generosity. I ate at the table outside while Nora cleaned up, and I drank bad coffee, and I looked at the mountains going purple in the dusk, and I thought about my claim at Morale's Flats, and whether the summer had anything in it that couldn't wait. I'd been scratching at that rock for 3 years. I was not rich, and I was not going to be rich. I was 57 years old. I had a mule and a rifle and a tent and a water skin and a sense of what decent work looked like, and that was more than some men had. Nora came out and sat down across from me. She'd washed and she'd dressed her wrists and she had her hair pinned back. She looked like herself, is all I can say, like whatever she'd looked like before last night and would go on looking like. She poured a cup of coffee and she said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "The claim at Morale's Flats. Is it something you need to get back to this week? I looked at her. I need someone at the property, she said. While the legal business settles, I'm asking you directly because I don't know anyone else in this town well enough to trust them, and I know Garber speaks of you straight. She set the cup down. I'd pay you not well because I can't afford well yet, but honest wages, and if you needed a place. She stopped, precise about what she was saying and what she wasn't. There's a bunkhouse. It was Frank's originally before we built the house. It's sound. I said, how long? I don't know. Until Hauser either comes at me legal, which Garber can handle, or tries something else, which he won't do if he thinks I've got a man on the property. She looked at me level. I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you to stand between me and a man who's already done this. She tilted her head toward her own face. I'm not asking you to do it for free or out of charity. I'm asking because you seem to me like a man who knows how to be in a place and hold it. There were a lot of things I could have said. That I barely knew her. That my claim wouldn't work itself. That I'd been on my own for 9 years and my own for good reasons. That she was a stranger I'd found tied to a cactus at 3 in the morning, and that was the whole of our history. I said, show me the property first. Then I'll tell you. We rode out the next morning. It was 11 miles and I walked the first half and she walked the second half without it being discussed. The land started ordinary enough, the flats and the scrub, but when we crossed onto her 37 acres something changed. You could feel it in the ground. The grass came in different, softer, greener even in June because of the creek she'd told me about. The creek ran through a low cut in the limestone and it was cold and clear and I cupped a hand in it and drank. I stood up and I looked north at the ridge, and the ridge was exactly as she described it. Limestone, pale, high enough on the north face to cut the wind in winter. The house was small but square and solid. The barn was in good shape. The bunkhouse was, as she'd said, sound. There was a garden in the back with a rail fence around it that had been mended recent and careful. I walked the north fence line. The posts were soft, she was right about that. But there were maybe 60 posts that needed replacing, and limestone split easy into good post shapes if you knew where to look, and the ridge was right there. I stood at the edge of her creek, and I looked at her land, and I thought about what it felt like to stand somewhere and know it was worth standing for. I said, I'll stay through fall. She was standing maybe 10 feet from me with her arms crossed not against the cold, but just in the way a person holds themselves when they're waiting. She looked at me when I said it. She didn't say thank you immediately. She nodded once, the nod of someone who'd asked a real thing and gotten a real answer and could be at peace with that. Then she said, I'll show you the bunkhouse. Hauser's men came 6 days later. 3 of them, not the same 3 from the road, different men. The kind of men a man like Hauser kept in reserve for when the first set made a mess. They came in the mid-morning on a Tuesday, 3 horses walking up the road to the house like they owned what they were looking at. I was replacing a fence post. I had the bar in my hands, and I was standing in the sun when I heard the horses, and I set the bar down and picked up the rifle. Nora came out of the house. She stood on the porch with her hands at her sides, and she didn't go back in for a weapon, which told me she'd thought about this moment and made her decision about how it would go. The lead man pulled up and looked at me the way men look at something they're trying to categorize. Too old to be a hand, not old enough to dismiss. Mrs. Vass, the man said, ignoring me now, Mr. Hauser would like to know if you've reconsidered. No, Nora said. He looked at me again. This time he held it. He was taking the measure of what I was, how serious, whether I was the kind of problem that required more men. I held the rifle across my body, and I looked back at him, and I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would do more work than just standing there. Mr. Hauser's patience isn't unlimited, the man said. Then he'll have to manage with the patience he's got, Nora said. Her voice was even, no tremble in it. My water rights are filed in Tucson and registered with the county. My attorney is Holt Garber in Patience Springs. If Mr. Hauser has a legal question, he's welcome to take it to Mr. Garber. If he has anything else in mind, he should think hard about what that cost him last time. The man looked at me one more time. I said, you rode far enough. He sat there a moment. Then he turned his horse and the 3 of them rode back down the road. Nora watched them go. She stood on the porch until they were out of sight, and then she sat down on the porch step and put her hands on her knees and looked at the road, and I watched her breathe. One long breath, then another. I went back to the fence post. After a while she came out to where I was working. She didn't say anything. She picked up the other bar and she started breaking the ground on the next post hole, the way someone does when they're done with one thing and moving to the next, and we worked the fence together until the heat got bad. Summer went. It goes fast in the desert once you stop fighting it, once you accept that the days are what they are and you work inside the heat where you can and outside of it where you can't. I fixed 41 fence posts. I restrung most of the north line. I cleared the creek run where a cottonwood had fallen in the spring and been blocking the flow. I kept the rifle where I could get to it, and I kept the horse. Nora had gotten a new one, an ugly little bay with a big heart, in the pasture close to the barn. Hauser sent one more man in August, just one, and he sat on his horse at the end of the road and looked at the property and then turned around and left. I was watching from the barn and I don't think he saw me. I think he saw enough. Garber wrote in September to say that Hauser had dropped his competing claim. He said it in lawyer's language, but what it meant was that Hauser had done the arithmetic and found it didn't favor him. I rode to Patience Springs to get the letter, and I gave it to Nora when I got back, and she read it on the porch, and she sat with it in her hands for a while, and I left her to it. The fall gather was the three of us, me, Nora, and a boy named Tomas Ruiz from the neighbor place who worked for day wages and was good with cattle. Nora rode like she'd been doing it since she could walk, which she probably had. She had a way of reading a cow's intention before the cow had fully formed it, the horse shifting before the animal bolted. A small thing, but the kind of small thing that, compounded over a gather, means everything. One evening in October, I was sitting on the bunkhouse step cleaning the rifle, and she came out and leaned against the rail. The sun was going down behind the ridge, and it threw the light sideways across the land, and the grass went gold and the creek caught it and ran gold a moment. She said, "My mother always said that if you could get a good man to stand beside you, the rest of it was just work." I kept running the cleaning rod. I said, "Your mother was right about that." She looked at the land. She said, "I can't pay you what this has been worth. You've paid me honest wages." "That's not what I mean." I set the rod down and looked at her. She was looking at the ridge. The light was still on it, that sideways autumn light that makes the limestone look like it's lit from inside. She said, "I'd like you to stay past fall." I said I figured I might. She looked at me then. Something in her face, not softened because she didn't soften, but open, the way a person looks when they've been carrying a thing alone for a long time and they've put part of it down. She came and sat on the step beside me, close, and she put her hand over mine, not holding it exactly, just her hand over mine, and she looked out at the ridge and the creek going gold in the last light. We sat like that until the sun was gone and the ridge went dark and the first stars came out over the desert. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything that needed saying. Cisco died that winter. Old age, the way a good animal goes, slow, then still, no drama. I buried him on the rise above the creek where the grass was long. Nora stood with me. She didn't say anything. She knew that mule had saved her life as sure as I did. In the spring I started fixing the barn roof, which had soft spots the winter found. Hauser sold his operations and moved on to somewhere else, Colorado, I heard, where he would be somebody else's trouble. Nobody in the valley talked much about him after that. People who leave tend to lose their weight pretty quick. In April, Nora filed an amended deed with Garber and it had both our names on it, which was her doing. She put it on the table one morning with the coffee and she said, "Look at that and tell me if it seems right to you." And I looked at it and I said, "It seems right." And she nodded and took it back. What I remember most from that year isn't any one thing. It's a set of things. The sound of her boots on the floorboards in the morning before I was up. The set of her shoulders when she was working on something she hadn't figured out yet. The way she talked to the ugly bay horse in the evenings, like she was filling him in on how the day had gone. The cup of coffee she left on the bunkhouse step when she made it before I was up and didn't want to wake me. The cup there in the morning with the handprint of steam lifting off it. I was 57 when I found her tied to that cactus in the dark. I was 58 when I signed the amended deed. I'd been a man who kept to himself because the world taught me that's what you did, and I was not wrong about what the world had taught me. But the world had also put Nora Vass on my road and a near-dry water skin in my hand. And some lessons come at you from the far end of a life, and they're different from the early ones. She chose me, that's the whole of it, not because I was young or rich or easy, because I was there and I was solid and I knew how to stand in a place and hold it, Because when something needed doing, I did it, and when something needed saying, I said it, and when nothing needed saying, I kept quiet. A woman like that, choosing a man like that, there's nothing I know of that weighs more. The ridge in the morning, the creek running, her coffee on my step. That's enough, that's more than enough.